First up is House File 1488. Representative Joachim is going to move that House File 1488 be laid over for possible inclusion. Hello, welcome to your committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you like to move your author's amendment before we get into it?
Yes, Madam Chair, I do have an A2 author's amendment because I too believe that there should be purpose statements in bills. So I had one drafted for this one, and that's in the A2 amendment.
Excellent. Is there any discussion on the A2 which adds a purpose statement to this bill? Not Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it the chair's prerogative that we'll do this for all potential tax bills, or because I know Representative Abijay had a bill or a comment to potentially do that.
Yeah, so thank you, Representative Swedzinski, for the question. So Representative Agbadje had a bill that brought forward some purpose statements. We do have a policy that we've adopted of adding purpose statements to expenditures. So any tax expenditure, definitely it's my hope and expectation, to the extent that we're hearing them, that they have purpose statements, partially at least in order to help the Tax Expenditure Review Commission that we heard about in one of our first sessions, allowing them to do their work of evaluating the effectiveness of the items in our tax expenditure budget. So yeah, definitely purpose statements are welcome on tax expenditures in the House Tax Committee. Anything further, Rep? Okay. All right, so Representative Joachim has moved the A2 amendment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed, please say no.
No.
And the A2 amendment is adopted. House File 1488 is in the form the author would like. Representative Joachim, to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members. The Minnesota Historic Tax Credit has been in existence since 2010 and aligns itself with the Federal Historic Tax Credit. I would like to thank the many folks that have worked on this credit in the past and who have supported it over the years, as well as those on the committee who've signed on to the bill this year with Representative Davids, Representative Olsenell, and then I believe also Representative Brandt. So the historic tax credit had been set to sunset in 2011. It was given a one-year reprieve, and then last year's tax bill that was included a removal of the 2022 sunset. Well, we know what happened to that, and unfortunately with the tax bill's demise, the program was abruptly discontinued. The Tax Committee has continued the work reviewing the effectiveness and return on investment for tax expenditures. What is nice about this particular tax expenditure is that we have the data. Every year, the University of Minnesota Extension Services does a thorough report on the economic impact of this credit. You should have the latest report in your packet. There are different sets of data points I would like you to look at. One is the data from the 2022 projects. The other is the data from the life of the program from 2011 to 2022. And you'll also see some really good summaries of the different projects that it has been used for just this last year. The economic impact of the projects leveraged by the Minnesota Historic Tax Credit for 2022 alone include $349.8 million of future economic activity generated from the projects supporting 1,300 jobs, and then $209.9 million spending planned by the project developers. And on average, about 35% of the credit costs are repaid immediately after completed construction. The report also notes that for every dollar of tax credit created, $9.90 of economic activity to the state. And that's in form of expanded property tax, increased income taxes on the job, the folks that are working the jobs. The data for the 10-year life of the project includes $5.9 billion in economic activity, 29,570 jobs that paid $2.2 billion in labor income. 20 Minnesota counties have had projects, and while half of the projects are in Ramsey and Hennepin counties, there are also high numbers of projects in St. Louis County, Winona, Otter Tail, and Stearns. Another benefit of rehabbing older buildings is that the majority of costs actually go into labor versus buying new material for new construction. The historic tax credit stabilizes and defines the unique characters of our main streets across our communities, especially in our small towns across the state. The construction workforce is employed on a historic tax credit also reach way beyond the borders of the city where the project's being done. For example, projects that took place in Minneapolis and St. Paul proper still had reached beyond their borders with crews coming from throughout the greater 15 county metropolitan area. The historic tax credit creates opportunities for small business entrepreneurship and development, as well as results in new employment opportunities in the completed buildings. I have a variety of letters of support in your packet, and I have the few testifiers here to walk through the bill and explain the benefits of reinstating the historic tax credit. They will each only be taking a few minutes, and I believe we are first starting out with a very short video from Revitalize Minnesota.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Joachim. Heidi Swank?
Yes,
Yeah, please introduce yourself for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Heidi Swank. I am the Executive Director of Rethos and President of the Revitalize MN Coalition. We are a coalition of architects and community members and old building lovers and developers who have been advocating for the Minnesota Historic Tax Credit for several sessions now. Minnesota's historic tax credit ended last June following a one-year extension of a program that was first established by the legislature as part of a jobs bill in 2010. The Historic Tax Credits program offered a 20% income tax credit for the rehabilitation of buildings that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, a pretty high bar. It is important to note that this credit's not paid out until the end of the project. That means that should a project be undertaken, money is not put at risk until that project is completed and paid out when the building is put into service. Therefore, not only is the public money safeguarded, but this tax credit enables a building to be put back onto the property tax rolls, thereby increasing public dollars available for schools, libraries, and the like in perpetuity. Our state program has mirrored the federal program that has been in place since the 1980s and is a permanent part of the federal tax code. The program is administered by the State Historic Preservation Office at the Department of Administration in partnership with the National Park Service, which administers the National Historic Preservation Act. According to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, 37 states have some sort of incentive to encourage historic rehabilitation redevelopment. Minnesota was among these states until the program sunset in July 2022. We are excited at the possibility of bringing this tool back to our state. With that, I would like to play a brief video for you that Revitalize MN developed in 2021. Please know that the numbers in this video are from the previous year and may not match the newer numbers that you are hearing and seeing in other places today.
There's only a small area of downtown Ely that really has that historical small town feel as you drive through before it sort of opens up again. You start at Central Avenue coming into town and then you get to the top of the hill and this theater and the marquee are right there. They're what draw you in. And for a lot of years driving by the marquee was a little sad, you know, that you knew it wasn't going to be lit up. And I think pretty much everyone in town who grew up here has a story of sitting in this theater, having rain fall on their head, having a ceiling tile fall on them, having a chair break while they were sitting in it.
Particularly if it was raining, you had to be careful because it was also dripping down on you and it would be running down the aisles. The theater was just in very, very poor condition. I had owned a business on this block actually since 1998 and had seen the block kind of go quiet after the theater closed in 2007. I think the community as a whole took it pretty hard. We always want our storefronts open. I mean, a town, in order to be alive and functioning, you need your stores occupied and open.
The
There are so many reasons to preserve historic structures. If you take a certain amount of money and you build a new building with it, you will spend most of your money on materials. If you take that same amount of money and spend it on restoration, you will spend a lot of your money on labor. So the labor will stimulate your local economy, whether it's your local tradesmen and workmen, or whether you actually get people from the outside who come in and stay in your hotels and restaurants.
When you drive by and you see the local plumbers, local electricians, you recognize all the trucks, you know that's a good thing. To match the existing details, to take it that extra mile and use the original woodwork, doing that was a really big deal, and I think kept the heart and character of a project like this that'll last a lot longer than a complete overhaul, not being true to any of those details.
There were buildings that were built in the 20s and 30s that will never be duplicated again. No one will put that kind of craftsmanship and style and materials into a building because it's just too expensive.
In these smaller communities, it means so much more because it can be the economic driver behind revitalizing the whole downtown area, for example.
Having this restoration project in itself was a boon to Ely, but now, with the new layout and the additional space that's been opened up in the building next door, it will be very, very useful for upcoming events.
All right, thank you for that. Does that conclude your testimony, Ms. Swank?
It does.
Thank you. Next, is it for this testifier?
be,
If you wouldn't mind, Ms. Swank, would you just answer a question quick before you take off? Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a question on kind of the video. It talked a little bit about the project itself, but like, could you walk a little bit of actually how it worked? So like, how much was local money? How much was the tax credit for, as far as they utilized it? Did the company that did it, did they sell the tax credit? Did they utilize the tax credit themselves, particularly on this project?
Ms. Swank.
And thank you for that question. I would have to, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head for the Ely State Theater, but I am happy to pull them together and send them to the chair and the commission if that's
Great.
appropriate.
That's great.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
great, and we'll just send that out to you as follow-up. Thank you, Ms. Swank. Next up is Justin Fincher. And on deck is Megan Elliott, if you could just get ready to come up next. Welcome to the committee. If you could just introduce yourself for the record and go ahead with a couple minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Justin Fincher. I'm with JB Vang Partners. We're a small BIPOC developer located in St. Paul. We've been in business for over 15 years, and we've created a niche towards working with purpose-driven organizations and projects which have strong positive impacts in our community. The Twin Cities and Minnesota overall had an incredible program with the state historic tax credit. The tax credit enables developers like JB Vang to partner with our communities and to preserve and reuse these precious historical assets. This program creates jobs within our communities, not just for the tradespeople, but for local developers, architects, engineers, and much more. At JB Vang, part of our mission is to invest in our communities with a focus on sustainability. This historic tax credit program helps us to achieve those goals. We also prioritize supporting local entrepreneurs and local commerce through each of our projects. As of recently, our firm has been selected as tentative developer status for the Hams Brewery complex here in St. Paul, which includes buildings going back as far as the mid to late 1800s. Our proposal includes utilizing the state historic program to reuse this complex and the surrounding site into a mix of residential and commercial uses, with a keen emphasis on building equity in our community through a mix of housing types, owner-occupied housing and mixed income apartments, as well as providing a community-minded marketplace with an emphasis on providing business owners the opportunity to own their individual share of that marketplace. In addition to this focus, our team has assembled a mix of community-minded public realm components, such as a programmable outdoor green space, an open-air plaza, indoor and outdoor play areas, and other exciting features to come. The State Historic Program provides much-needed support for us to be able to offer these features, which we know will be a key asset in the community. Historic tax credit projects not only create jobs, but they also create value for their communities. Every dollar of tax credit invested in historic redevelopment projects creates nearly $10 of economic activity, a tenfold ROI that directly benefits local communities. The State Historic Program has also provided our firm with additional pathways to finance two recent projects. The conversion of a historic office building into a Korean immersion elementary school, and the conversion of a historic office warehouse structure into mixed-income affordable housing community.
Could you just finish up, Mr.
Yep.
Fincher? I'm sorry.
I can confidently tell you these projects would not have happened without the State Historic Program. I'm here to testify in favor of renewing this critical resource for small developers and allow us to continue making positive changes in our community.
Thank you very much. Before you leave, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question maybe for the audience, and the question is there anybody that opposes this bill? Testifying against it? Well, then, Madam Chair, it looks to me like everything's been said, it's just not everybody said it. So,
Yep, we're gonna try to keep it brief. Our future testifiers. Thank you for that, Representative Davids.
no, thank you, Madam Chair.
Up next, Megan Elliott. Welcome
All
to the
right.
committee.
Thank you. I'm going to talk really fast. At your request.
Not for Representative Davids.
Madam Chair, now
Yes,
we're making
Representative-
progress. This is progress.
All right, great. That's what we call progress. Ms. Elliott, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Megan Elliott. I typically wear 3 hats in the building reuse industry. Today, I'm going to ask you if I can wear 4. My first hat is as a co-founding member of Revitalize MN, along with Heidi Swank and others. The reason we started this group was to gather all the voices across the state of Minnesota. As Heidi mentioned, it's architects, but also tradespeople, building owners, and I want to add cities and public entities that see this as an important economic development tool. My second hat, I am an entrepreneur. I started a company called New History 10 years ago. We solely focus on revitalizing historic buildings and sites across the state of Minnesota. And in the 10 years that I've had that company, we've worked on almost 300 projects in almost 40 communities across the state, from public parks to rural redevelopment to downtown development. My third hat that I wear is I'm a real estate developer. I like to call them high potential historic properties. That means really hard. I just finished my first project under this new company called Jill Pine, and that was the redevelopment of a long vacant county jail in Duluth, now known as Leona. We converted that building into workforce housing. And I will tell you that with only 10% of real estate leadership being women, breaking into real estate development was almost as hard as converting 99 jail cells into housing. The fourth hat that I want to wear for you this afternoon is as a technical expert, I am happy to ask those nitty-gritty questions about how these credits work. As a consultant and a real estate developer, I can go as deep into the weeds as you need me to. I'm only going to make 2 points. I know we're brief on time. I want to emphasize that this credit gets used by a lot of different communities for a lot of different project types. So just on my desk right now at New History, we're working with the Seward Redesign, nonprofit developer in Minneapolis to redevelop the Coliseum building on East Lake Street for a BIPOC community entrepreneurship hub. We're working with a small nonprofit arts group in Le Sueur to restore a theater. And we've been working literally for years in Duluth with the Duluth Armory Group to redevelop that building into marketplace, office, and clean manufacturing.
Final couple sentences, Ms. Elliott.
Sorry?
Just if you could conclude your testimony
Yeah.
shortly. We're at your 2
My
minutes.
second point is that this program gets used across the state of Minnesota. I'm not going to repeat the statistics that Representative Joachim gave you, but they were, I think, demonstrate how powerful this tool is. And I'll just leave you with, I'm happy to answer questions, particularly around the nuts and bolts of how this program works.
Thank you. Next up is Claire Vander Eyck.
Hi, thank you guys. I promise not to belabor this point, but Madam Chair and committee members. I so appreciate and thank you so much for sponsoring this bill today. My name is Claire Vander Eyck. I am a senior development manager with Schaefer Richardson, and I specialize in affordable housing. Schaefer Richardson has a strong reputation of delivering high-quality urban infill projects throughout the upper Midwest, but our roots are really in adaptive reuse of historic buildings into housing in the warehouse district of Minneapolis. Personally, I hold a master's degree in historic preservation. I serve on the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission, and I consider myself a preservationist first and a developer second. I grew up in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I currently reside in South Minneapolis. I could spend my time today speaking to the statistics that have already been spoken to, which I think are incredibly important, as to how economically impactful this tax credit is, and specifically how it's a game changer for spurring investment in old buildings across the state of Minnesota. But instead, I'd like to highlight some benefits that I think are a little less easily quantified. The very reason I sit before you today and the reason my career has shaped the way that it has up to this point is because of historic preservation. I've always felt a special affinity with buildings, not just because I like architecture, but I feel very deeply the connection that buildings have to the strength of our communities. Our built environment can have a direct impact on the strength of a community and the community that inhabits it. And it's just simply true that neighborhoods, their design prior to the proliferation of vehicle transportation was more condensed and inherently supported deeper community connections. These are the type of buildings that the state historic tax credit can help preserve. There are buildings all across the state of Minnesota, both in urban and rural communities, that will benefit through thoughtful investment that can extend their useful life, even when that means that their very use must be completely redefined in order to meet the current needs of the community. Without the state historic tax credit, those projects will not happen. Most of those projects will not happen. The built environment impacts each of us every single day, whether or not we're keyed into it or not. My statement to you today is that we as developers and investors and as elected leaders have the responsibility to ensure that these buildings support strong communities, and I ask that you support the state historic tax credit.
Thank you, Ms. Vander Eyck, excuse me. Next up is Michelle Baltus-Prebel. Oh, sorry. Representative Olson, did you have a question for the last testifier?
No, Madam Chair, it's not necessarily for the one testifier. It was maybe if I could just ask a question to the future testifiers. So I have a master's in history. I know that, what I find very influential in history may be different from what another individual who has a master's in history sees as historic. I think what would be very beneficial to this committee is what does the application process look like? All I'm seeing here is that they have to verify eligibility for the credit or grant. Can we get some of the stipulations as to what fits within this, how it's provided, something towards that? Does it have to be on the National Historic Register? Does it have to be on the State Historic Register? Who decides which of these, what is history and what is not history? That would be very beneficial to me.
So if the testifiers coming up could tell us what is and is not history. No, I'm just kidding.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. If folks who are coming up testifying have comments, but also we're going to have time for some conversation. So maybe we'll revisit once the testifiers are done if there's sort of some more specific questions you have about the application process and other items. So thank you for that. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your 2 minutes of testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Gomez and members of the committee. My name is Michelle Baltus-Prebel, and I lead the housing studio at LHB, a Duluth and Minneapolis-based architecture and engineering firm. I'm here on behalf of the American Institute of Architects Minnesota in support of this House file. I know you've heard from developers of many different types of projects that benefit from this important tax credit. I want to testify today to make sure the impact of the credit on Minnesota's affordable housing stock is clear to the committee. LHB has long dedicated a significant portion of our practice to the design of healthy, sustainable, resilient, affordable housing. In the past 2 decades, our firm and its partners have utilized the historic preservation tax credit on 12 significant projects that cumulatively created or preserved nearly 700 units of affordable housing around the state. Some of these may not have happened without the historic preservation tax credit. The projects rehabilitated existing buildings, giving them new life and avoiding the cost, waste, and environmental burdens that would come with teardowns or new construction on greenfield sites. These projects are also embedded within existing community infrastructure, from transit and childcare to supportive services and healthcare. which increase the likelihood that residents of the affordable housing can build stability for themselves and their families. As policymakers, you know how challenging it is to assemble funding for affordable housing. We need every tool in the toolbox to create more of the housing our Minnesota communities desperately need. Restoring this tax credit will help firms like mine work with developers to create more affordable housing in existing buildings and help communities give the assets they already have new life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, Nicole Goodman. So we have about 15 minutes left for this bill. We do want to leave some time for member questions and conversation with the author. So if you're testifying, if we could keep it pretty brief. Thank you. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief. My name is Nicole Goodman, and I'm the Director of the Department of Planning and Economic Development with the City of St. Paul. I'm here today to testify in support of this tax file. Historic tax credits, as you know, have long been a critical element in the financing structure of many important redevelopment projects in St. Paul and throughout Minnesota. These projects breathe new life into structures with great historic significance to our communities. The buildings are often vacant and dilapidated before redevelopment, which contributes to community concerns and blight in the neighborhoods in which they are located. While the projects are in progress, work is created for architects, engineers, and laborers. And after the projects are complete, not only have these important pieces of architecture been saved, but jobs have been created, housing supply has often been added, and the local tax base has increased. Renovating historic structures to meet today's building codes and services is very costly, and the tax credit is typically a necessary piece of the financial equation, meaning the project would not be financially feasible. It would not happen without the availability of the tax credits. As mentioned, the tax credits are not earned until the projects are complete, so there's no risk involved. If the tax credit is given, that means the project was completed and the positive impacts have been and will continue to be realized. In closing, historic buildings and their aesthetic features are a part of what make every city and town unique. Preserving them is a high priority, not only for their historic value, but as mentioned here, as an important economic development tool as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Next up, Adam Dunnick. On deck, we have Sean Smith. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. And the time sitting over here, I cut about 5 paragraphs from my testimony really quick.
We thank you for that.
My name is Adam Dunnick. I'm here on behalf of the North Central States Regional Council of Carpenters. And today I'm here because this bill is a jobs bill to us. Since its inception in 2011, the historic tax credit is responsible for over 29,000 jobs across the state. In 2022 alone, it's responsible for over 1,200 jobs just in the construction field. And last year, the credit generated $95 million in labor income. Construction job creation of this type also supports our gold standard apprenticeship programs, which lead the way in recruiting women, minorities, and veterans and other folks who are not represented in the construction trade into the trade, which is a great way for us to do outreach and grow our construction market. Lastly, I just want to say the Carpenters Union stands strongly in support of programs like these for the reasons I laid out, and happy to stand for questions or support the author as we move forward.
Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Dunnick. Oh, now where's my sheet? Next up, sorry, Sean Smith. Welcome to the committee. And on deck is Amy Spong, or Sponge. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Spong, he just told me. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Tax Committee. My name is Sean Smith. I am the Public Policy Committee Chair for NAIOP, Minnesota. We are the leading organization for commercial real estate owners and developers. And in this role, I am serving as a volunteer today. Our members really view themselves as providing the physical infrastructure for all the businesses that operate in the state of Minnesota. There are many, many, many things to like about this credit, and they're all of which have all been said. One thing I'd like to remind all you of is historically, this credit has gained broad bipartisan and bicameral support. And so on top of all of the other great things that have been said on this, I would just like to say thank you, Chair and Rep. Joachim, for being the author and the co-authors as well, and I appreciate the time allocated today for this testimony.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being with us. Finally, Amy Spong. Spong, excuse me. Welcome to the committee. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Chair Gomez and committee members. I'm Amy Spong, Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer and Director of the State Historic Preservation Office. Thank you. A lot of the benefits of the program have been already stated, so I won't repeat that. I will mention that over the 12 years that we've had a state historic tax credit in Minnesota, we've approved 193 projects. We've been averaging about 12, just over a dozen projects a year. And since the program sunset in 2022, we have had 3 applications for the federal-only credit. So the federal credit is still an active program that we administer with the National Park Service and the IRS. I'm happy to speak to the question about process a little bit and some of the eligibility requirements. In order to get the state historic tax credit, you have to receive the federal historic tax credit. And so the general eligibility requirements for the federal credit is that the building is listed on the National Register or determined eligible for the National Register. That is a separate program that our office administers along with the National Park Service as well. We go through a board review process, recommendations are made, and then ultimately it's the keeper of the National Register at the Park Service that determines what gets listed as being eligible on the National Register. There's very broad criteria for being able to be listed on the National Register, and there's a whole host of property types that are identified and considered significant for the National Register. There is a 3-part process on the application process on the federal side. Part of that is determining that significance or eligibility status of the building, and then the rehab standards. Another major eligibility requirement is that the project, the rehab, must meet federal standards and guidelines, and that's namely the amount of the work that we do with the National Park Service is determining whether the rehab standards are being met.
Thank you very much, and thanks for addressing Representative Olson's question. If you wouldn't mind just sticking around, if we can go to Representative Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the information on that. I really appreciate it. One quick question about the National Historic Register or the state's register. Once you're on, is it nearly impossible to get off? Basically, what happens? I mean, we're fixing up an old historic building, and then 80 years from now, it needs to be fixed up again. Are we going to run into? Is this like a self-perpetuating prophecy that we're going to continue to need these historic credits into perpetuity due to the fact that we're required to continue keeping these historic sites up, which I am for. I'm a history buff, big history buff, so I am for that. I'm just curious.
Ms. Spong.
Chair Gomez and committee member, I'm sorry, if you could just repeat your.
Representative Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Is it possible to get off the National Historic Register?
Ms. Spong.
Thank you, Representative. Yes, we have actually delisted some properties over time. Sometimes they are not maintained and they've lost their integrity, so to speak, or they have been demolished. And so unfortunately, we do have to delist some properties at times, yes.
Anything further, Representative Olson?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, so we're going to go to member conversation now. Representative Brand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I spent a lot of time in Ely, and I was actually in that theater when you can actually see the ceiling tiles fall down, and you can see those pictures. That was still in operation at that point. It was really sad. It could have been demolished, but I actually haven't seen the inside of it since, but I know that they had done some work. What a difference. That thing looks as good as the day that it was built and opened up to the public. And I think that that speaks a lot to the community and the support of the community, but also this program itself. And that is like a boots on the ground way to show that this is actually working. So I appreciate the opportunity to see what that looked like before, again, to remind myself from about 20 years ago, and then now to see what it looks like now. It's just amazing difference.
Thank you. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a question, we had some comments about the creating affordable housing. Do we have any history as far as that development and how long those properties stay in affordable housing? Do they, after, is there a certain time period that if they're, created for affordable housing, get approved through that they stay affordable housing, or do 10 years later after being rented out, then they become higher value projects, or what's kind of the history there? Or could any of the developers speak to that?
I can go to the author and some testifiers. I guess I'll say, and I know we have the housing chair here, just that putting together financing for affordable housing is obviously like super complicated, and different funding sources will have different requirements in terms of the affordability term is what they call it. I know that that we switched. I don't want to say it wrong. The two numbers 30 and 15 are in my head, and so I know that when I was at the city, that we had an affordable. The city of Minneapolis, for example, we had an affordable housing trust fund that was funded by general fund property tax levy money that the city put aside, and that we changed the requirement from 15 to 30 years of affordability when I was there. That's just an example, though. But I know that it takes like sometimes a dozen sources of funding to put together an affordable housing project, especially talking about deeply affordable housing, which is affordable at 30% of AMI, which is sort of where there's the most need. But I don't know, but there's a bunch of developers in the room, so they probably know better than I if there's specifics about projects that have been funded using the historic rehab credit, and if there is the requirement when it's being used for housing, that there's an affordability term associated with that. Thank you.
Yeah, Claire Vandereyck with Schaefer Richardson, and again, I specialize in affordable housing, so happy to answer some of that questions. Not every historic tax credit project is an affordable housing project, of course, and not every adaptive use project goes into housing. The reason that you often see those two paired is because they do kind of financially meld together quite well. You're seeking the same type of investors. So to answer your question about the length of period, that's really dictated by the organization with which you're getting the tax credits from. So as Madam Chair noted, the City of Minneapolis provides tax credits, and they may dictate terms as to, depending on what financing sources you're pursuing, as to how long that affordability period is. As Chair Gomez noted, generally speaking, it's for a minimum of 15 years. That's a federal requirement. But generally speaking, our communities have largely moved to a minimum of 30 years. We have a 15-year initial use period, plus another 15-year extended use period, in which point that those income and rent restrictions stay in place. We've also seen communities across the country extend that even further as we've seen the need for affordable housing deepen. So generally speaking, you're going to see the commitments for at least 15 years, but more often than not now we'll see them be 30.
Thank you, Ms. Vander Eyck. Representative Swedzinski, is that good for you? Okay. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Joachim, for bringing this bill. I've long been a supporter of this, but I did just have a question. I see that in section 4.1, you are repealing the sunset, and even though I really love this program, I also really love sunsets because I think it's good for us to reevaluate every 5 or 10 years how we're spending the state's money. So I just wondered if you could speak to why you are taking out the repealer. Thank you.
Thank you,
Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Robbins. It's where that credit was actually structured is in that statute with the sunset, so we want to remove the sunset. I know folks in the room would like to have this, not to have to come up every year to fight for this, but I do know in other parts of our statute, we have an automatic 8-year sunset on projects. So that will be a point of discussion for the chair and the committee.
Thank you. Yeah, and so in 2021, we did adopt a policy of an 8-year sunset for all new tax expenditures. So I will just say that it's my intention to move forward with that. Obviously we're going to be, I want to honor that part of statute that we negotiated and signed into law. So, as usual with these bills that we're laying over for possible inclusion, there are tweaks that can happen to them as we're moving forward, and we'll be discussing that, I'm sure, more about expenditures sunsetting. So thank you for bringing that up, Representative Robbins.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Representative Joachim.
Thank you. While I do appreciate that statute too, I would like to have some consideration of making it a little bit longer for this in particular, because it takes, now that we've stopped it, it's going to take a while for it to start up again, for folks to start applying, and to have the stability of funding for projects moving forward, since currently the bill is drafted to be a 1-year lump sum after it's in in process. The governor's bill, I believe, has a 5-year time, so maybe even thinking, if not 8 years, at least 5 years, you could get those 2 5-year cycles in. So it's just something to throw out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion to the bill? All right, I'm not seeing any. Representative Joachim, did you have any closing comments for us?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll just make it brief. Thank you all for the discussion, members, and the questions. The historic tax credit plays an important role in our communities. It has data to back up how successful it has been in spurring the economic development that adds to our community property tax base. Data that shows creating jobs increase our income tax for our general fund. And also, in the bottom line, it enhances our communities with vibrancy with each project by retaining the historic structure. I would love to have your support for this bill as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, Rep. Joachim will move that House File 1488 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion, and the bill is laid over.